The Cannabis Conversation. A European perspective on the emerging legal cannabis industry.
Welcome to the Cannabis Conversation with Anuj Desai, where we explore the new legal cannabis industry by speaking to the professionals that are helping to shape it. Hope you had a good week. It feels, to me at least, that general mainstream coverage of cannabis seems to be picking up. It feels like almost every day there's an article on the BBC or the Financial Times or Guardian in the UK, which I hope is showing signs that the stigma is being overcome through an erosion of ignorance. So I'll take that as a positive and see it as very encouraging. I've got a slightly left field story to begin with, but some observations on something I've been getting involved in on a personal basis recently. My 9-year-old Rufus has recently got into skateboarding over the last 3-6 months. And this means that we spend most weekends, when it's not raining, at the skate park. Good 2-3 hours each day on a Saturday and a Sunday. And I never did this when I was a kid, but I've really been blown away by the experience. I think skateboarding teaches people a lot about resilience. You basically spend a lot of the time picking yourself up off the floor. It's all about practice. And, sometimes you hurt yourself, but you just get back up again. And I think there's some really, really positive lessons there, particularly for entrepreneurs dealing with setbacks. The connection to cannabis is actually really big too. There's definitely more than a whiff of herbal jazz cigarettes in the air when we're down there, but everyone is really friendly and supportive. There's a real community there. The big guys are helping the little kids out with tips and tricks and pointers. People cheer and high five when someone nails a trick. They help people off the ground when they fall. I think it shows a really positive aspect of cannabis culture. So my advice to any budding cannabis entrepreneurs is get yourself down to a skate park. I reckon you could learn a lot about perseverance and tenacity. Having said all of that, I'm not going to lie. As a parent, you're pretty much petrified the whole time you're there, but that's another story. Anyway, hope that wasn't too much of a digression. On with the show. Really interesting chat coming up now about standardizing production of plant compounds. Enjoy. On today's show, I have Ken Clement. Ken is Executive Chairman of PRM Inc. And PRM are a Canadian vertically integrated phytopharmaceutical company, which we'll find out all about what that means in a minute. Ken, welcome. How are you doing today?
I'm very good. Thank you for having me on.
Real pleasure. Where in the world are you?
Currently, I'm sitting in Melbourne, Australia. I was down here because we're building here and in different aspects of the market, and many trips in 2019, and came down for my first trip in 2020 when the whole situation with COVID happened, and that resulted in me staying during this period of time as I feared that I couldn't get back into the country as a foreigner. So working on my residency status here and staying in Australia until things clear up and I can get in and out of the country easier. So
yeah, I get it.
Happily, I say stranded in Australia, but very happily stranded in Australia.
Yeah, there are worse places to be. My wife is Australian, so she's desperate to get home when all of this stuff clears up. So I understand the issues. But yeah, cool. Great to have you on the show. Got a really interesting angle that you guys are coming at cannabis from. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But maybe we'll start just with a bit about you. If you can tell us a bit about your background and what you were doing before and how and why you got into cannabis.
Well, my background really been in sports, and I played a lot of hockey, and I currently own the Wellington Dukes in the Ontario Junior Hockey League. In my business background, I've been primarily in sales and senior management of companies. How I got into cannabis, my son was born 18 years ago, and he had a long gap esophageal atresia. I still talk about this sometimes, and it gets a little emotional and real for me because of the challenges he went through. But suffice to say, he is fine, functioning today. After issues he still deals with, but he was basically born without an esophagus, and then one had to be constructed. And 30 surgeries later, in the first 6 months, he was having some seizures. And they scanned his brain and knew that it was not anything to do with the epilepsy side of it. They figured his body just reacting to all the surgeries that he was having to go through, and struggled. They were struggling. We were struggling to see what we could do to fix it or help it. And someone suggested that I talk to a woman that turns out when she was a nurse, but she wasn't working at that hospital, but she went out into the woods and was picking up plant materials and putting together plant compounds. And I thought, we go to the supermarket, we buy groceries, we blend them, fruits and vegetables into a blender and drink them. How much different can this be? And knowing very little about all this at the time, well, this, I think within 48 hours, the seizures had stopped. And within a month, the doctor said, yay, we finally have the right combination of drugs that will stop the situation. And my partner and I looked at each other and said, I wonder if they have or not. Of course, first we were warned not to tell anybody what we were doing. We're in an intensive care unit in a hospital in Vancouver, Canada. And at the end of it, we decided to stop the plant material, and the seizures came right back. And then I got into a little battle with the doctors and that's where my education started on why they won't prescribe plants. There was no standardization, no titration, no ability to determine how much, and no clinical evidence at all behind it. And that is really the firing point for me, where I looked at that and said, there's got to be a different way. Like, this can't be the way. Everyone has to suffer because there isn't something that will work when we know there's something right there that will work, but we can't use it. And really, that's how I got into the whole pathway of cannabis. Was really the cannabis purists of the world will not like this statement, but I didn't know a lot about it. I was a hockey player. I was trying to make the NHL. I was never involved with cannabis. I had no idea of the power of the plant. And I've come to appreciate and learn this over time, but I didn't really understand that. With my perspective was, I need to show how I can standardize a plant. This plant has the economic value behind it that if I chose that plant to standardize, that I can afford to build the right types of facilities to move forward. So my approach from it was really, this was a target plant that had a lot of medicinal properties in it, and it had the right economic conditions surrounding it to actually, maybe I could sell some of this product as I was on the journey, if it was even possible to standardize it. And really, that's a long-winded version of how I got into cannabis and how I got into this sector.
Yeah. And the way you describe it, did you have any hesitation when it came to cannabis? If you didn't have much dealings with it before, were you worried about the stigma and all the negative side of things?
No, I never was worried. That never bothered me. I knew the challenge I was up against, the massive challenge I was up against. And I think that challenge, I've come to learn that it wouldn't have mattered what plant I was doing. If I'd started with dandelions, and along the way, I met someone working with dandelions to a treatment for leukemia, I would have the same challenge of convincing a doctor that a plant could actually benefit a patient. And without the clinical data and evidence and the trials behind it, you're not going to convince modern doctors. And the only way to get that to happen is to go back in the process to standardize the base material. And so I never really was worried about the stigma attached to it. And I felt it was a smart plant to choose from day one because of all of the excitement around it. And this was 2009. And in Canada, there was a legal process to grow plants on your own for, I think maybe already almost 9 years, or at least 7 years. I think it was around 2001-ish in Canada, you could grow plants. I'm not 100% on the date, but from the early 2000s, you could legally grow your own plants if you were properly licensed. So I knew that it had a plant with a high interest level that potentially could help me in my journey to fund all this, because it took a tremendous amount of funding, and it still continues to do, because you're not in the mainstream of pharma. You're a fringe trying to prove that your product can be produced in a way and can be effective for patients and can get the clinical evidence behind it that you need to become mainstream medicine.
Yeah. Wow. That's quite a journey. And there's a lot more to it, and we're going to hear a bit more about it. So why don't you tell us a bit about PRM then, and what you guys are doing, and what sort of areas are you looking at?
Okay. First of all, I'll just say that PRM is just a shortened down version of plants research medicine. And when you work in different countries around the world, you need to have licenses under each of those different countries' names. So PRM is really the mother company, and there's subsidiary companies working in different levels in different areas around the world where we work. And really the whole thing is around standardizing plant compounds. It's kind of the basis or the building block of the foundation of the company. Is if you can't standardize the plant compound, then you can't move to the next level. And so standardizing plant compounds is the focus of that. And that's been a journey. And currently that journey, I'll start off with really where that began, that really changed the direction for me. And that was when I accidentally got booked into a trade show in Toronto, Canada. And I met Professor Mike Dixon from the University of Guelph, who the University of Guelph has a division of their university that plays in controlled environments and working with NASA, and they can actually grow plants in that at that university in this department, the controlled environment plant section of that university. And Mike's team have been working for years on standardizing outer space, like Mars conditions on Earth, to see if plants could germinate. And when I ran into him, I said, "Hey, I want to pick a spot on Earth. I want to match that spot. I want to be able to computer control it so I can have every aspect of that environment maintained." And he said, "Oh yeah, that's easy. Why don't you come and see me?" And so I made an appointment, went to the university, met with Mike. Yeah, that was in 2014. And today I'm the chair of that program in the medicinal plants section at the University of Guelph in Canada. And I was on the phone with him like 2 days ago. We're talking on a regular basis, and we still are joint at the hip in terms of the research on the medicinal plant side of what a terminology that I guess whether it was Mike or I or in combination, we just started playing with the words EMO, environmentally modifying organisms. Because I was really adamant I didn't want to be doing any GMO, Mike. I want to be able to control the environment. And I think he's the one that actually came up with EMO. Yeah. So that's what's happened with the initial start of it. And they have research chambers there that, of course, at that point in 2014, they were research chambers. These are chambers like, yes, you could walk into, but barely turn around in, right down to smaller chambers. Nothing had happened at a commercial scale. And with his team, our engineers, our team, we were able to produce the first commercial sized chambers. And so that if you're going to grow enough compounds to make a medicine from it, you're not going to have commercial opportunity if you're stuck in a small little chamber. So we designed a system of multiple chambers, and by 2016 had produced multiple crops and maintained pharmaceutical deviation of less than 10% for an active compound. So a compound that's coming from, not from a chemical, but coming from a biological. And we did that crop after crop after crop. And really that's what kind of put our stake in the world a few people in the world really took notice of that. And those few people are my partners today. And without having that basic ability, we couldn't attract the people we attracted to. And so I'm talking about right now, Dr. Dedi Miri, who is one of the, if not currently the world leader in researching cannabinoids. And I think last time I talked to him, I think he has maybe 12 different trials he's involved with on identifying individual compounds in the cannabis plant on treating different medical conditions. And so he's the one that really said to me, Ken, when you grow these plants standardized, I can't do proper research unless I have standardized compounds, and we can't make medicine for the future without having those standardized compounds. And he also taught me that every different extraction technique resulted in a different medicine. So he would take a flower from the same flower, extract that 4 different ways, screen that against, say, cancer, certain types of cancer, and then that exact flower would work and not work based on how it was extracted because of the degradation that you can do to the compounds through that process. So that told me I felt if we could get to commercial scale standardization, that we were on the right track. And then after meeting Professor Mary, developing that relationship that we have today, I knew it was on the further on the right track. And around 2017, maybe 16, around 16, I started to realize, okay, we have now the ability to grow standardized compounds. We need to be able to extract these compounds out to make medicine. And I ran into a company in Germany, the Martin Bauer Group. And I don't know if you've ever heard of that name before or not. Most people in the world don't know them because they're a major B2B business, but they have 20 production facilities around the world, and they have 2 verticals of the plant pharma and plant food verticals, and they either do liquid or dry extraction of Martin will kick me for not remembering this, but it's in the tens of thousands of tons of flowers a year that they extract out. And they're definitely one of the world leaders in extracting plant compounds. And they have the ability to extract multiple different ways. And that's what really attracted me to Martin. And likewise, when Martin toured my facility at the time in Canada, he said to me, Ken, this is the largest chambers in the world that grow standardized plant compounds. And I didn't tell you this before we started talking, but I bought into a company, an engineering firm that builds these chambers, because part of my future, because of global climate change, is the weather has been affecting the quality and the quantity of the flowers that we need for medicine. And I felt that we needed to be able to grow these in a standardized way. And when he said that to me, knowing the status of a company the size of Martin Bauer, I knew again I was on the right track to what we were doing. And Martin Bauer Group owns a company called Finselberg. Mr. Finselberg, the company still has his name. I believe he started extracting in 1875. They're one of the largest plant extraction companies for pharma in the world. I think in the early 80s they became the first GMP pharmaceutical level extractor of plant compounds. So we're talking about the world experts in this. And when people like the Martin Bauer Group or people like Jenny Mary take notice of what we're doing, I knew I was on the right track. So
yeah.
And the third component, I said there's 3 major pieces, is a company called Psyche Medical. They're an Israeli-based tech company that developed technology that can deliver plant compounds into the human body. And they have multiple clinical trials behind them, and they're actually on the market in Israel today. And PRM, one of my subsidiary companies, is in the process of commercializing for the first time outside of Australia, our first time outside of Israel, the Psyche inhaler into Australia and New Zealand. Now, this is a device that needs standardized plant APIs, so compounds to be grown standardized, and they can deliver that in a metered fashion, similar to, say, think of an asthma inhaler, but directly into the lungs. And so very, very innovative and new technology, and that technology will deliver multiple different plants. So again, back to that basic, we need to standardize the compound, and then that compound finds its way into the human body through either traditional drug format that we would be using with the Martin Bauer Group, or in an inhalation device like the Psyche inhaler.
Yeah. And can I just query what you mean by standardization? Are you talking about the structure?
Yes, I'm talking about the ability to harvest the API, and that whatever particular API that the researcher is looking for, and to make sure that API is growing consistently within the deviation, that 10% or less deviation, crop after crop. So if you're going to make a claim and get an FDA approval for leukemia at some point in the future, you're going to need to have that compound come out exactly the same, or with inside that standard deviation set point in a crop that you grow in 2021. And if you're growing multiple crops in that year, every crop you grow in 2021 of that product, and in 2029, you need to be at that same standard deviation you were on that original crop that got your approval process through. So I'm talking about repeatable batches of the actual compound being the same, and that compound being the same at the end of the process, at the point where it's entering the human body. So after the shelf life, after the extraction, after the manufacturing process, all of that is part of it. And then, you know, when you start talking about plants, you're talking about, sometimes plants have terpenes in them, and that terpene may be an important component, and terpenes are volatile at room temperature. So it's an integrated system that takes you from not just growing that. You need that terpene at the right level at the end of the 2-year shelf life, for example. And so it's standardizing that plant compound throughout the process, right to where you're in that finished product form, and then being able to do that over and over and over again.
Yeah. And what do you use to kind of maintain that stability then?
Well, first of all, it's the way you're producing that, and then it's the way you're handling it. And so we're using special chambers that allow us to have that level of control inside that chamber. And I'm talking about things from altitude to humidity, obviously is a big piece, to all the environmental factors, whether it's the wind that's got to happen in there, the moisture level, all the different light levels, and then controlling that in all the various growing stages, but all the processing stages where the environment that it's happening could affect the outcome. Could affect when I'm saying the outcome, like your finished product, right down to where you're extracting it, manufacturing it, and then sealing it so that you're maintaining that shelf life and controlling every aspect. The plant part was the hardest part. I can tell you a funny story about the first time. A learning curve is that I remember the first time we harvested, I got a call from security saying that we've got a problem. I can't remember the exact amount, but it was in the tens of kilos of product is missing. And we have them on, in Canada, we had everyone on cameras. They're like, how can this be possible? They can't move any, we're getting ready to line them all up in strip search. And no, you're not going to line them up and start searching them. What was the humidity in the room? Oh, they told me the humidity in the room. And I'm like, guys, that much kilos of product that went in wet evaporated in the air that day. And so there was a good learning lesson to you better control not just what you grow it in, but every aspect along the way, because you can lose maybe important products that are vital to a treatment. And we're working in a wound care, for example, and we know there's a terpene inside wound care that's important, and I need that level of that terpene in the finished product. And so it's about controlling all the aspects along the way, for sure.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you for that. And to sort of broaden out into the wider topic of EMO that you're specifically looking at, and epigenetics, which we've talked about a little bit on the show, as I understand it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, it's distinct from genetic modification, which is actually modifying the genes.
Yes.
But it's changing the expression of some of the genes through manipulating the environment. Is that kind of broadly?
Yeah, you're hitting it right on. It's, first of all, if you don't control the environment, you're not going to have any hope of getting a standardized compound out. But plants have DNA, and plants have history, and some of these plants have been on our planet for thousands and tens of thousands of years. The research has been doing that's happening today, where discovery happens in the Amazon or the rainforest, and they're searching for unique plants, and those plants are brought back to labs and analyzed and look for novel compounds in there to see if there can be some success in treating a medical condition. Well, we do the same steps, but those plants, like cannabis is a medicinal plant, the compounds that the drug developers are looking for, researchers are looking for, are based on what they can see, based on the weather pattern that has been applied to those plants in the last 100 years. Well, what if you put the weather pattern on from 10,000 years ago, what combination of expressions of compounds may come out. And maybe if one of those compounds treats something unique, well, you now, from our RP standpoint, we know exactly what altitude, what temperature, what humidity, how we treated that plant that gives us protection way over a patent. We can maintain and know that exact recipe of how to produce those compounds. And we stumbled across this process in the past by just changing that environment, changing it drastically from what we knew cannabis liked to grow at. And we ended up expressing a compound that one researcher in the world had never found before. No one else had found that product before. And when he discovered that, when he analyzed one of our plants, he was like, that plant has a highest level of that compound I've ever seen before. How did you do that? Well, this is just an example of it. We were playing around with the environment that caused that plant to express higher levels of a certain compound that happens to be one of the main compounds he needs. And I believe he's doing human trials this year on that product. But it just gives you an example of the power of what could happen when you do this. And it's definitely not GMO. This is just simply changing something in the weather pattern, whether it's the temperature or it's the humidity levels or what it is inside of it. And then once you know that, you can just repeat that on a commercial scale.
Yeah. Are you noticing that there are any specific conditions that seem to be very favorable, or they increase the yield, which I assume is the metric you're trying to achieve?
Actually, no. The yield is always something I think the analysts and the market guys like to talk about. When someone's selling cannabis, for example, at whatever the market price is of cannabis at the time, and you're producing a product that's going to maybe cure leukemia or be beneficial for leukemia, there's different price metrics attached to that. Yes, it's a longer process to go down the path we're going down, but the metrics are not the same. So if the plant, and this was hard for our horticulturists to get a grasp of in the beginning, I don't really care what the plant looks like in the end. I really care about what is the compound and what that compound will do at the other end. And so it's not always about yield. Obviously, you want to produce, once you know what compound you're producing, what your target compound is, then it's about optimizing the growing conditions for that. And this is part of the ongoing research that we're doing in places like the University of Guelph. And recently we signed a 5-year MOU with the ARC Research Medicinal Plant Center at La Trobe University in Melbourne. And we're actually doing something unique with them. And we are on a path to attempt to be the first in the world to be GMP pharma level at the flower, at the actual API when it leaves that room. So not GMP the process after the fact, but get it certified GMP at that point. And that's partly my quest to a couple of factors around that. One of it is shelf life testing in batches. All chemicals that are used to make drugs have batch tested shelf life on them, and you need to do a batch test on each batch of flower. So that's going to add a lot of cost into the process and time lag in the process. But mainly for what we're working on with the future of that Psyche inhaler, where we can actually put compounds directly into the human body with that device. If I can get to GMP pharma level at the API, then I'm one step ahead in that process for regulatory drug approvals.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, there's a lot there.
It's really interesting technology, and we're going to open source this. It's not something that we want to hide from the world to try to protect it, because I think the future is, the writing's on the wall today. If I stopped 100 people today in Melbourne and asked them, if you've got some medical condition and I can show you a clinical trial to prove that this plant, just pick a plant, whatever plant you want, was grown organically and it's clinically proven to treat this condition, would you choose this first, or would you take the synthetic drug form first? And 100 out of 100 in 2021 will say the plant first. And so humans are demanding, we look at our organic vegetables on grocery shelves 20 years ago. They were hardly existent. Today, they're big sections, and we're driving this. Whether the drug companies, and I believe they are catching up or will catch up, it's the future of medicine, is to get it as clean, as pure as possible. And really that's what EMO is really at the forefront of doing. No one really understands what that is on a broad spectrum worldwide basis yet, but it's one of the keys to getting us to the point where I can get the clinical evidence out of it.
Yeah, and I guess the endeavor to achieve the standardization goes some way to address what regulators and drug companies want, is that kind of consistent process, right? Which they've designed to slightly suit their own ends, but, this is a challenge to it. So I think the standardization is a good step in the right direction.
Yes. Yeah. It's the key.
Yeah, fantastic. Are there any kind of specific challenges that come with EMO at all?
I think the biggest one is the stigma around, it's basically the training of a physician. The physicians are trained, and they have been for decades, that to be effective at a treatment, and I'm on their side. I understand exactly. They need to know exactly how this drug is going to react with their patient. They're trying to do the best they can for their patient. So they need have evidence behind what this will do for them. And I'm talking about the drug. And so the challenge really is, how do you get a plant to that same level? In 2013, I was at my first family medical forum in Vancouver, Canada, and roughly 5,000 doctors. So it was your typical GP conference. And we surveyed about 1,000 doctors that day. And we got 10% of the doctors saying they would never prescribe medical cannabis no matter what evidence you showed us. And I've got 10% saying we would write prescriptions for medical cannabis today. That was in 2013. And I got 80% saying, how does this work? You're going to get a bottle of flowers and they're going to figure out how to titrate that? And what is the titration rate? And where's the clinical evidence that it does anything? Show us this and we'll gladly prescribe it. Well, you flash forward to today, and I'm not current on the numbers in Canada, but I'm going to guess when I last looked at it, it was pushing 300,000 prescriptions written. So it's 300,000 plus prescriptions. 7% of the GPs in the country have written a prescription. That number goes through into Australia we're pushing over 100,000 prescriptions. In Germany and Israel, those are the countries I know a fair bit about their programs and work in. And across the board, it's less than 10% of the doctors writing a prescription. So show them, teach them, give them the evidence. They're open to prescribing, the bulk of them. They're only trying to help their patient. And if you can show them a pathway to help their patient that is from a plant, as long as it's got the evidence behind it, they'll prescribe it. And so that is really the biggest challenge, is to get through that stigma. In Australia, we did a small 287 patient, I'm not going to say a clinical study, but post-marketing data, let's call it that. But we hired a research firm to do that. We did it all through one large clinic, the Metro Pain Clinic in Melbourne, Australia. And obviously Metro Pain, they're treating pain. And we tracked those patients for 8 months. We ended up getting a 66% self-reported reduction in opiate use. This is where the patient is saying, we're using less opiates, or telling the doctor, I don't need as much opiate now. And we got a 2-point drop in the VAS score for pain. Well, all that information we used to get a Royal College of Physicians accredited course written. In December of last year, we were approved to educate doctors on that. So our approach is really get out there as early as you can and get as much data as you can collected and start educating the physicians on the benefits of that particular plant-based medicine. And so I think it's a journey. It's not going to happen overnight, but the market is a large market, and there's even at 10% of the doctors prescribing, it's a big market segment of the population of the people. And And some pharmacists that we work with here closely have said to me, Ken, I've never seen anything like this. It's usually the drug company driving the patient demand. And this is the opposite, where the patients are demanding the product. And I believe as we evolve and generate more plant-based medicines, and there's more awareness around the ability to produce plant-based medicines, there'll be more demand in the market for it.
Absolutely. Education. That's great. Great way to end the show. Thank you, Ken. I really appreciate that. Really fascinating work that you're doing, and very much look forward to hearing more about how you guys are progressing. So we'd love to have you back on the show at some point.
Well, thank you for having me, and I'd love to come back.
No, really appreciate that. Thank you.